Things happened rather quickly after Tom gave his assent to the meeting. Tanu casually leaned back in his chair, giving the human a polite smile while imagining what could possibly be happening in the next room. Tom looked back and broke the silence after a moment. I'm meeting someone with a writ? That's... what, exactly?
The power to act without legal hindrance. To an extent. It's complicated.
Tanu nodded, the worry in his eyes over what Mir might do with her authority clashing with his smile. He suspected it looked as glassy as it felt. Between the lack of time to prepare on one hand, and Axia's aunt on the other, what should have been an easy interrogation was far too precarious for his taste, and after turning Tom's question over in his mind, he decided to season it. Tom, you understand that I'll need to make some recommendations on how to proceed with your situation. Fortunately, there's someone here who wants to meet you, and I believe she has an option you may want to consider very carefully. Her name is Lady Mir Pelavon. She doesn't speak English particularly well, however, I'm sure we can muddle through any questions, I wasn't aware that I had a situation until now, Agent Tanu. Tom sourly digested the sudden change in his expectations as he looked across at the little Shavanti. The rug didn't seem to have been pulled out from under him just yet, but after the brief conversation Tanu had in his omnipad, it felt like the world was tugging at it. Still, the agent had seemed more than a little flustered during the call, and Tom couldn't help wondering if Tanu registered that he'd spoken in English. Well, Tom, I'm sure you understand that there are always situations. My work is to make sure they go away and are as resolved as easily as possible for everyone concerned, Tanu rallied, feeling he'd fully regained his leverage on the conversation. Tom slid back in his seat and eyed him carefully. Agent, speaking as the situation you may make go away, that's not nearly as comfortable for me as it is for you.
You might be surprised, Tanu replied dryly, before giving the human one of his best smiles. For all that he tried to be a picture of warm confidence, he couldn't help savour the irony of what it was. Unfortunately, the moment didn't last, and the knock on the door might have been a whole second before it burst open. Axia barely led the way.
Hello, Tom, Mir chived inside the room, making it to the chair before Axia was half inside. I'm so very pleased to meet you. When my niece told me about you, I wanted to make your acquaintance. Do you have the time for Zettelkink? Deep within himself, Tanu sighed. Well, doesn't this just send a mixed message? Tanu could seldom remember anything like the conversation that followed. When she wasn't hopelessly lost by thinking about men, Axia was a tough and intelligent agent. She'd matured over the years, despite being humbled in her past. More importantly, she wasn't full of herself like many agents he'd worked with. While she had outgrown some faults, she possessed strengths that she still didn't entirely give herself credit for. When not faced with someone like Alea, Axia could be crisp, professional, assertive and competent. Her few failings were nothing that Tanu couldn't compensate for, as both a partner and as her friend, and over the years he'd found their professional relationship more beneficial than he cared to admit. When it came to self-confidence, Axia didn't hold a candle to Mir Pelavon, and while her aunt was polite, she clearly wasn't going to take no for an answer. Much to his relief, as he translated, she wasn't pushy with her proposal, yet she was so insistent and firm that more than once Tanu had involuntary flashbacks to his second-year primary teacher. Axia's aunt laid matters out, and in a way that he was able to clearly translate, and while Lady Pelavon seemed to glaze over while waiting for an answer, she never lost herself by staring at the human like a free dessert. As the back and forth continued between the two, Tanu occasionally found himself looking at Axia's future. Looking at Mir, it was easy to see the woman his friend was becoming, given a few more years and some light ribbing along the way. As Tanu finished helping Mir to lay her proposition out, Tom nodded thoughtfully. So, let me see if I have the gist of this from you both.
Yes, Tom.
Tom looked down for a moment and coughed, before looking back at the expectant face of Mir, seated between the more pleasant but unreadable face of Agent Tanu and Agent Axia, who still looked slightly stunned. Do not think of Rocky and Bullwinkle. Don't do it.
don't. Lady Mir is an instructor, a professor at an academy for girls. Well, young women between 10 and 12 shul years old. That's like 18 to 21, I think. She's teaching, well, comparative shul and Earth history and culture as a sort of primer for how to deal with Earth and humans. And she wants to offer me a salaried position on shul at her school as some sort of teaching assistant who can also offer interpretation for the students. It's something like that, yes. You must understand that the Academy for Young Ladies is one of the top 3 finishing academies in the capital. AYL graduates are set on a path for internships and ranking positions throughout the Imperium, and the Academy has a very demanding curriculum, covering everything from etiquette to business administration. To prepare graduates to work abroad, it offers courses on the myriad worlds and prominent cultures that make up the Imperium, such as Dirt, Helka, and so on. Lady Mir is here to establish the Academy's first course on Earth. "What's he saying, Axia?" whispered Mir. "I get most of it, but I can't read human faces like you. Please tell me he is going to say yes." "He's asking Tanu to clarify a few things, and he seems to be thinking it over." Axia shot her aunt a warning look, uncertain how well this would work, given Warwick's background. "I don't know if he's going to say yes, and you shouldn't get your hopes up either. He isn't a pet, and even if he does look like Uncle Chandler, there's hardly a reason to offer him a job." "Right you are there, Axia. His degrees in history and philosophy are, though. I couldn't have a better combination if I'd been out there taking resumes. I can gather all the facts and books I need during my visit, but you can't get insight just by facts. Having a partner to interpret the information is what brings them to life. I'd be roasted alive by the head administrator if I brought back a human toy instead of a qualified assistant. But he seems to have the background I need, and he's asking all the right questions." Mir paused, looking at Tom with a smile stealing over her for a moment. Look at him, she thought. He needs something in his life too. He needs this. Mir glanced back at Axia's partner, as he and Tom exchanged a few more questions, and a pleading note crept into her voice. "Agent Tanu, I know you're doing your best, but please don't let him say no." Tanu paused long enough in his conversation with Tom to give her a depreciating smile. "I'm doing my best, lady, I promise you. In fairness, he seems to be thinking it over carefully." "Agent Tanu, I have a condition I'd like to ask the lady about." Tom had begun looking at Mir well into the conversation, though it was Tanu's facility with English that made the conversation effortless. Mir's English was possibly conversational, and he no longer had to strangle back laughter at her accent, but he kept his focus on Tanu just to be sure. His future was on the line, and he couldn't afford mistakes. Every academic setting has its own politics, and it sounds like this academy has its share, so let me be clear. I won't be a token human, and if she's serious about this offer, then please tell the lady that I'll have to be able to speak my mind freely. If I can't, then I won't be able to do what she needs. If the school wants to offer serious insight into humans, then that's my condition, and I have to insist on it. Lady, Mr. Warwick has a condition for you. He says he must be able to offer his perceptives as a human without constraint. Would that be acceptable? Absolutely. I wouldn't want anything else. The students are our future, and they have to see humans as taking their place in the Imperium. They seem like us in so many ways, but the things on the datanet fill the girls' heads with so much rubbish. Is there anything else he wants to know? Some of it, Tanu muttered, as he thought over his time dealing with humanity, before answering properly. I'll tell him you agree. Tom, Lady Mir agrees to your condition. Is that your only one? Well, yes and no. You said there was a situation. If I agree to this, can you promise me the situation goes away for Jeff, Paul, and the rest? The lady is talking about a 3-year contract with options. That's 3 shill years. So as long as I hold up my end of the work, the situation goes away? Mir leaned forward over and held Axia's hand. Agent Tanu, why is he frowning? Does he understand that I agreed? He understands, lady. It's just that Axia and I need to make sure things are resolved on our end. Axia shrugged. This is hardly regulation, but I want to help Aunt Mir. This man doesn't seem like any kind of radical, and if he leaves Earth, then he never becomes one. This removes him out of any place where he might stir up other humans, doesn't it? After all, we can't just leave things as they were before. Now he's been brought in for questioning, we have to do something. Tanu pursed his lips, not betraying any sign of his thoughts one way or the other, in front of the human, but nodded after a moment. I agree. Tom Warwick isn't a radical, but this situation isn't safe if it's left unresolved. He's a few years too old to offer enlistment to the Marines as an option, but if he just takes the offer, then everyone is happy. The problem is the human in his group named Jeff, but I think we can handle that with light therapy. We can truthfully promise him that his friends will be fine. Tom looked back and forth as the conversation moved between the three Chauvante, though he took the chance to watch Mir most of all. The woman had lit up the room with unquestionable energy from the moment she walked in the door, and there was no denying she was beautiful. Slim and athletic, she was fit, without radiating the hardened muscle of the Marines and interior agents Tom had seen. If that wasn't enough, her clothing had said civilian from the start. Mir wore a black dress suit with white piping that looked tailored enough to be expensive, with slightly padded shoulders that didn't quite scream the 80s, but it was the knitted cap she wore that made him want to smile. After a few minutes of translated conversation and wary questions of the agent, he still had to admit to himself, okay, you're being an adult, but to be honest, man, she's hot. Tom, I've spoken with my supervisor, and I can promise that if you accept this offer, then you can rest fully assured that there won't be any issues. Tom nodded, taking a while to digest that before looking up. Lady Mir, I accept offer. I please be thanking you and sorry for hearing where you thinking from, your mind or heart. I'm wary of agents interior and not meant being rude. Needed being certain about them. Tanu wasn't sure if he was the first to close his mouth in astonishment, but Axio and Mir were still staring. After a moment, he made a note. Your file doesn't mention you ever learned to speak Vatiker, Mr. Warwick. It wouldn't. I picked up a copy of Rosetta Stone for Shill in the mall a few years ago for $60. Cash, he said to Tanu, before looking at Mir abashed. Sorry again. You still wish to offer me the job? For the first week after Tom accepted the contract, Mir had taken charge of his life with a ruthless efficiency that seemed to work for both of them. Having prepared for the trip to Earth, she had a good idea of what she was hoping to find for the Academy, as far as books, materials, and cultural artifacts for the Academy collection. She'd been far less certain she'd find someone to accept the job of teaching assistant, and at best she hadn't expected to find a qualified candidate until her visit neared its end. Quietly jubilant at her good fortune, she was eager to press forward with the work. Insisting that Tom call her Mir from the start, he responded in kind, and her heart leapt in happiness as they quickly established an easy routine. Tom seemed to come out of himself and grew less reserved with her every day, and she found herself smiling even when he wasn't about. She hadn't done that since Chandler was alive, and initially she picked at herself over it out of guilt. Knowing the requirements of the Academy shook her out of it. After all, there was no crime in simply being content around the company of a man. She knew it couldn't last. It shouldn't last. She had a wonderful working friendship with the head administrator, but it had taken several conversations to convince Ganya Cesano of the need for a grant and to start offering Practical Humanity 100 alongside the courses covering the other races of the Imperium. It wasn't that Ganya was unfair about it, but some of the material on the datanet about humans was still sending shockwaves throughout the Imperium, and even beyond. Her arguments over the previous year won out, convincing Ganya that it was time. 10 years on, it was undeniable that humans were as stubbornly determined to keep elements of their culture alive as the Rakiri ever had been. A solid offering would help their graduated young noblewomen pave the way to a reasoned integration of imperial human culture. Mir pressed her point that higher education had a duty to clear away the tide of misinformation on the datanet, which was little more than pornography. It seemed unbelievable, yet human erotica had only grown in size and variety, as uneasy green zones expanded across over the planet. Some of the things the staff had to confiscate were beyond belief. The senior instructor for applied economics was still insisting she hadn't fainted. Tom had been a perfect gentleman, though, and the only time he became stubborn was his refusal of help in the third week. He set aside 3 days to sort through books he felt might be of use, and packed some possessions he wanted to bring to Shill. It seemed a curiously short time to arrange the move and storage of his belongings.
Mir had wanted so much to be of help, given the tremendous amount of time that Tom saved her simply by planning her collection for the Academy. She'd explained more than once that she wanted to reciprocate by helping him sort the matters while he ended the rental of his home. It was perfectly true, although she had hoped to see how an actual human lived firsthand. But while he was understanding, eventually Tom relented enough to explain. He was embarrassed. The mistake had made her want to hug him on the spot. It was a pain she recognized. Even though she lived on the Academy campus, she still owned the small 5-bedroom home that she had shared with her husband Chandler and her 2 co-lieb Haberine, Amit and Shalea. Tom clearly understood that she knew his past, and he never brought up the loss of his wife, but he made it clear this was one thing he had to put to rest himself. Mir understood all too perfectly. Tom hadn't wasted time on the matter, though, and Mir's heart ached for him. It shouldn't take just 3 days to pack up a lifetime. During the days Tom used to take care of his personal affairs, Mir spent her time walking around the civilian town outside the base, taking pictures and letting Axia point out places of interest whenever she was free from work. That close to the installation, signs of the Imperium were everywhere, and she judged everything with a critical eye, trying to picture the city as it might have been before the changes. It was tantalizing and frustrating to be so close to her work at last, but she held on to the hope that they could accelerate her agenda now that she had employed Tom. The Academy contract had been specific and binding, though she didn't have any illusions that Axia and her partner had given the matter an extra push to seal the deal with her human. No, with Tom. I can't think of him as the human, or my human, she scolded herself, as she strolled through what they called a town square, though she was smiling in anticipation as she walked and looked over the county courthouse. He's a person, and I so want this to work out. It almost came as a surprise when her omnipad pinged, as Axia wasn't due off shift until the end of the afternoon. Startled, her heart did a happy flip when the caller ID came up as Tom Warwick. Hello, Tom. This is Mir. I didn't expect to hear from you today. Can you understand me?
Ah, Mir. Good, I'm good. Was not certain I was using this rightly, but wanted to call you. Is good? Is this a good time?
Yes, that is. This is fine, Tom. Has everything gone well with your packing? Are there any problems? She asked, concerned Tom might be having second thoughts. While he'd signed the contract, if tending his affairs had made him decide he was unwilling to go through with the deal, she was probably better off finding a replacement and losing the time. Uncertainty gnawed at her because she rather liked because Tom seemed like someone she could work with.
No, packing is done, but you are being very nice to offer the helping. It is not much, but would you still like to see home? Is packed, but thought you might like still, and could see if I packing too much?
Mir paused in thought at how to best respond, thrilled at the opportunity, and well pleased she brought a translator for her day out. Yes, please. I would love the chance to look about, if you're sure you don't mind. I could be there in half an hour. Is that all right?
Half an hour. Yes, that's fine. I will see you then.
Mir didn't need much time to catch a base transport out to the listed address. Watching the buildings about her change from shops and undecipherable edifices of one sort to another as the miles passed, she began to take more pictures as the signs of imperial influences dropped away. She was lost in wonder at the astonishing variety of styles, shapes, and colours of what must be homes, surrounded by foliage that at once seemed both exotic and familiar. It was almost a surprise when her driver pulled to a stop. Corporal, is it? This is the address, you're certain? It's just so small.
Yes, lady.
The driver, a young Marine, looked back over his shoulder. I know, it's strange seeing how tiny some of their homes are, but you get used to it. Besides, I've seen smaller. If you don't see a button near the door handle, then the custom is for you to knock on it like you're bumping your fist. Not too hard, though. That scares them. Oh, thank you. I'll call when I need to be picked up, she said, fixated on her view of the house as she got out of the transport. It seemed rude to take a picture, and after a nod from the driver, she started up the gravel path toward the house. Mir had an acute awareness of how alien the building was, with its slatted olive walls and white trim. There wasn't a sign of purple, and the front patio was formed out of native rock set in some kind of grey accretion. Studying the native wood of the front door, she was startled when it opened before her knock. Tom stood framed in the entry, wearing pants made of the native fabric called denim that seemed almost ubiquitous, and a black t-shirt with an unfamiliar sigil over his left breast. She paused despite herself as she looked at him. Dressed in a coat during the interview, she hadn't had a sense of Tom's physical build, and while he didn't look like pictures of the human soldiers she'd seen, Tom was fit. She groped for words as Tom canted his head and opened the door wider. Mir? Hello. Would you like to come inside? Yes, thank you. I didn't expect your call today. I appreciate your invitation. I didn't want to intrude after you explained, but the chance to see... Well, your homes are all so different from one to the next. I hardly know what to think. Mir stepped in through the door and took out the translator, toggling it to active. Trips into town had already shown that even the improved model remained less than perfect, but it was still a great help. With the general knowledge of Vatikir, the humans in town had been relatively easy to understand. As she stepped inside the room properly, she was first surprised by the size. Everything was all so small, and yet the ceiling didn't seem cramped in the least. Native hardwoods made up the floors in polished tones of reddish brown, while the walls were of some sort of plaster. She looked about in all directions. The rooms were empty, save for 3 heaped stacks of boxes and 2 travelling bags. Tom seemed to think a bit before nodding. Old, this. We called it craftsman style. House is about 100 years old now. As he looked about, Tom pointed about him. We call this living room, kitchen over there, bedroom, other bedroom I use for office, bathroom. Mir walked through the small home, thankful for the clearance overhead, though careful to bend as she went through the doors. As they walked about, Tom answered her questions about the rooms and all the different styles of homes she'd seen on the drive over. Still, he seemed to fold in on himself somehow, growing distant as they came back to the large room with the boxes. Is not too much to be packing? He asked. What? Just this? She said, working to cover her surprise as she looked at the small accumulation. Mir didn't want to pity the man, but by volume alone the collection seemed meagre at best. How could anyone have so little to show for a life? She was certain Tom understood it was a 3-year contract. Even after Chandler had died, she still had reminders. Possessions shared with him and her Corley Pabren, Amit and Sholea, lingered about her home off the academy grounds. Even after so many years since Chandler and Amit's deaths, if she were forced to move, there would be so much. So many memories she could never bear to be parted from. Even if their shared life had come to such an abrupt end, it could never have fit into the tiny collection laid out before her. Tom nodded at the piles and pointed to them from smallest to largest. I moved to small place after family died. Put things in storage, but these... clothes. I had some for hot weather, but not much. Can get more. Books, ones I love, but also ones I thought of using. And music, he shrugged, reaching in to pick up a square case from inside the open box. Can't leave music and books for 3 years. Too important. He turned the case over in his hand and offered it to her after a moment. I've seen these, she smiled. These are laser-etched recordings on these discs. I read about them, but never thought I would see one. I read humans were already starting to create digitized files, though. We could convert them over once we start back to the shill. It might save you some space, but no, this isn't too much at all. For 3 years, I honestly thought there would be so much more. Tom pondered a bit, looking at the largest box, full of the discs, but nodded. It will be... Damn aggravating tenses are worse than Latin, he grumbled, briefly lapsing back into English as he made a face. Good for Academy collection to have complete collection of the insects. Mir cocked her head and considered. Tom, I know you understand what we are doing. Why would we want recordings of the insects? The Beatles, Tom said with an emphatic nod. Music group people named after Earth insect. Does not make sense, but it is so. No understanding of humans without understanding music, books, art. Must have, so take. Mivert thought about that for a moment. With continual use, Tom's Vaticraire was improving by the day, but it grew worse when he rushed. Still, he seemed entirely certain about the contents, even if she couldn't understand why, and Mivert decided she was missing something. Shulvanti enjoy listening to music. We sit quietly, enjoy it, and we let it stir us, but I get the feeling this means something different to you. Pretend I don't understand why this is important, and tell me why you think it is. Tom's face seemed to grow more animated as he worked through the question, dropping the disc cartridge back into its container. In box is books, history, thought, is books by a male named Pratchett. God, I'm saying that like I expect you to know who that is. Pratchett explained that people are like books. You understand? No, I'm not sure I do. It's like I hear what you're saying, but we don't have the same context. Context? It's like I know you want to tell me an idea, but we don't see it the same way from the start. Ah. Tom closed his eyes a moment before poking at his Omnipad and pulling up the translator dictionary. Context. Right. Let me see. Humans. We are like stories. Life is stories. We live and make the story of our lives. All right, I can understand that. Mivert tried the idea out in her mind as a way of seeing the world, still feeling she was missing something. But as it was, at least she could see the perspective objectively. It's, well, a bit individualistic. Shulvanti think of ourselves in relation to the community. An individual may win or lose, but the greatness of the community reflects on the person. When someone shines brighter, it makes the community brighter. I understand what you're saying, but it just seems backwards. Mivert thought for a moment about stories. In her youth, every girl wanted to be like the fabled Princess Tarkani, rallying the people in the face of the volcano and saving them at the cost of her own life, or like the fabled First Empress herself, slaying the last of the rival queens and bringing prosperity to all of Shul like a river of glory. Even some of the human stories now sweeping through Shul culture had remarkable similarities. Why, the new video of Hermione Potara and the Immortal Stone was becoming wildly popular back home, and the story clearly embodied such values. I just don't see how this could be so common to all humans. Yes, lady. We plan a trip to Australian sector. Humans there tell stories of their lives, tell stories of the past, tell stories of true things. We see stories and we give power to ourselves. You see human stories of Dreamtime. Mivert pondered the idea, wondering if this emphasis on the individual might be why it was so difficult for humans to accept the Imperium, with all of its many benefits. Despite the difficulties posed by the liberation, the years were passing, and it made absolutely no sense to stubbornly reject such overwhelming advantages, unless humans were that geared to the individual first. I think you've lost me, Tom. Can you explain? Mivert watched as his face seemed to freeze and remake itself, twisting between questioning to thoughtfulness, wrestling with an idea that seemed upsetting to him. Eventually he raised a hand to wipe his eyes, and she realized he was trying not to cry. Mivert wanted to fold in on herself out of embarrassment. She didn't know how she had hurt Tom's feelings, but cursed herself for being so insensitive after Tom had invited her over. After a moment, he stopped himself, holding up a hand to forestall anything more. You know, my daughter, died in the invasion, lady. The invasion, he bit out, seizing the word and leaving it hanging between them. After gazing at the boxes a moment, Tom held up a hand before digging into the smallest, drawing out a tiny frame. He sighed as he looked at it, before offering it over for her to examine. A younger Tom sat in the grass, an arm wrapped about a woman with long brown hair. Sat between them was another woman, young. Her features favoured Tom heavily, except for her hair, which was the gold some humans possessed. Wife, daughter, Tom offered quietly. This was summer break for school, 2 years before invasion. Sat out and watched fireworkings, ate and watched stars, loved both, very much. All was right until Imperium. You understand? Mivert looked at the photo. It seemed insensitive, even unjust, to look away after a cursory glance. This was the measure of Tom's former life, and she studied the faces. The smiles and the casual way the couple hung together,
in the image made her ache, remembering her own family circle. Even though she, Amit and Sholea never had a child with Chandler, she could imagine how it might have felt. The joy of a family outing, with daughters, maybe even a son. She had wanted that so much, wishing so many times since his death that they could have had a child. Tom patiently watched as Mivert studied the photo, an earnest expression on his face. It was enough, perhaps, and when she was done, he set it back in the box with care, wrapping a shirt over the glass before looking back to her. "They died," he said simply, without preamble. "I was angry. Then there was nothing. All gone. Nothing more to live for. You understand this?" Mivert nodded, not knowing what else she could possibly say. The loss of his entire family still seemed horrific, but she understood the ache all too well. For Axia to explain his story was hardly unique, seemed monstrous. The Imperium had come to help, to save these people from countless internal wars and environmental devastation. But so much seemed to have gone so very wrong. Good intention should never have created so much suffering. "I do, actually. My family died as well, Tom. It was an accident, but can you please believe that I understand how you feel? I know the pain never goes away. It felt like the world swallowed up my whole life when my husband died. It was still a long time after the notification before I could fully believe they weren't going to walk through the door. When I finally did, my co-wife and I threw ourselves into our work and we didn't really come out." "I understand why you came. Occupation," he said, studying her face, looking for something as his eyes fixed on hers. "But for my life? Story over. Empty time. Reading. Thinking. Learn Vatica to understand you. To learn make sense of why. Make sense of Imperium. Time losing anger and learn forgiveness, but it was empty. Wait. I want this, right?" Tom finished tapping at the omnipad and nodded, seeming satisfied as he checked the words he pulled together. "Mivert, we make stories of our lives, but it wasn't real until you made me face what happened. Forgiveness isn't real until there's acceptance, too. I knew I was alive, but I wasn't living. Then you came in, and you offered me a reason to live, like a quote from a book. In that book, which is my memory, on the first page, that is the chapter where I first met you, appear the words, 'Here begins a new life.'" Tom looked down at the box, avoiding her gaze. Pain still etched his features, but there was also a rough, hopeful determination. "I didn't think I had any more chapters left in me, but I promise to do my best for you. You've given me hope, but I still have something to give. I don't have enough ways to say in gratitude for that." Mivert felt her lower lip wanting to tremble, as she watched Tom poke him on the boxes again. Just like that, there it was. These humans were so much like Shilvanti and yet so alien, but there it was, and understanding blossomed deep inside her. Mivert felt it so deeply that it seemed like it hurt to breathe, as the loss of her husband and co-wife like a fresh wound. She looked at the tiny box that held the photograph of his family, and after hesitating over how to say it, she decided it just had to be asked, just as it was. "You know, I heard you with Tanu the day we met, Tom, that you didn't go into therapy. How did you find it inside yourself to forgive us?" Mivert watched as Tom thought it over. There was sorrow in his eyes that seemed to be reaching across the gulf span between them. And as he reached for some answer, she thought about how Tom had lost his child. She'd once had so many hopes in common with Tom, working through the events of their lives. Yes, like a story. And he buried himself away, she thought. Maybe like I did at the academy. It gave me a purpose, but he hasn't had anything or anyone for all this time. Tom closed his eyes and whispered, "Hey, it's a kind of magic." As Mivert stood there looking bewildered, Tom pressed on. "Mivert, we make stories. For me, music being just as important as stories. Humans express ourselves by art, music, stories, different people, different ideas that change and grow. That's why I will show you stories about Dreamtime first. Humans not one story, dreaming all past and now and future. Humans are pot of melting, Shilvanti different, Shilvanti not changed since Empress, Shilvanti all one thing now." Mivere thought a bit about what Tom was saying. Well, I suppose you could see it that way. We have lived for the community for all our recorded history, and once our homeworld was unified under the first Empress, we also came to enjoy a common culture, a shared heritage, before we reached out to the stars. A common vision that's brought us strength and stability. Too stable. Rakri and Helcom and others not like Shilvanti, so Shilvanti only see Shilvanti. Shilvanti so stable but slow growth. No fast change for you, but humans and Shil not so different, Tom said, perking up as he taped the boxes close for transit. Humans close enough to Shilvanti that we shake you, like Shilvanti shaking humans. Change come. That's why I like your idea for class to teaching. I explain humans and maybe change for humans not have to be so hard. Maybe not so hard for Shilvanti either. Mivere stared at the boxes as Tom worked, digesting that. There was no sense in arguing the point. Tom's Vatica was broken and needed work, but there was no denying she understood what he was trying to express. After all, hadn't promoting understanding humanity been at the heart of her proposal? If there was understanding, then Earth could be open for development that much faster, and leave behind more strife as it was brought into the Empire. It would be better for everyone. And he doesn't see it as a liberation. Maybe none of them do. She paused, hit by the possibility. We will bring humans forward 1,000 years in only 50, but is that enough for them without the right to choose? And Tom thinks the humans will change us? She didn't know what to say, watching as Tom finished his work, and stood up. Music seemed important to him, so she reached for that, vowing not to let the thought go, but saving it for later. So, humans like stories. Is your music as important? Tom thought about that, and for the first time, she watched a smile chase over his features as he considered how to reply. To some. To me, best songs are stories. People are stories, but some people also have songs. Tom smiled again, and it lasted a bit longer as he nodded. To me, it's all same. I want to talk about this more while we work on your Vatica. I want to understand this better, she said, and he nodded, while he checked the bags were set to reach their hotel. Tom, if you have songs for people, do you have a song for yourself? Tom looked up at her for a long time, looking at her eyes. She felt like the human was shouldering the weight of the world. Somehow, when he nodded, coming to some decision inside himself. Screw it. If I'm going to spend 3 years with you, I suppose you have every right to try and know me. If I can't teach you about me, how am I going to teach anyone else? Pulling out his human version of an omnipad, he set it on top of the tallest box and poked at the screen. Glancing back up at her, Tom canted his head with a shrug. Song not in Vatica, but you can listen. I'll taking bags out for cab, he said, hefting a duffel over one shoulder. He tapped the phone twice more and stepped outside. Mivere listened to the high notes that started to spill into the hushed room. One instrument was joined by another as she listened, an alien song, playing out for her as she stood alone in an alien home. The melody came clear, simple, as a single voice moved over the melody, echoing in the emptiness of the silent house. I know that spades are the swords of a soldier. I know that clubs are weapons of war. I know that diamonds mean money for this art, but that's not the shape of my heart. That's not the shape of my heart.